Les technologies numériques induisent des bouleversements humains, économiques, sociétaux, éthiques, géopolitiques, environnementaux ou encore juridiques. Les organisations doivent donc s'assurer que leur stratégie numérique respecte un certain nombre de principes et valeurs liés à la conception, la réalisation, la commercialisation, la promotion ou l'exploitation de processus, services et produits intégrants du numérique. Cette responsabilité est un élément clé de la confiance et donc du développement de nouveaux usages et de la transformation numérique. Protection des données personnelles, transparence des algorithmes, ouverture des données, souveraineté numérique, empreinte carbone. Quels sont les critères de cette responsabilité numérique? À l'instar de la RSE, faudra-t-il instituer demain un devoir de vigilance numérique et promouvoir l'achat numérique responsable?
J'entends rien. Ah. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Lille Grand Palais for this 15th edition of FIC and to this plenary session dedicated to company digital responsibility. Thank you for being with us here in Lille. Wherever you are in the world, you might be watching us online and you have access to a translation, and there's equipment for people who want to listen to the translation as well. Please, you respond and comment anything we say on Twitter using hashtag FIC2022, and we have an illustrator who will be with us to respond to the contents of this plenary session. So let me ask Christian Claude to join me on stage, the director of the Human Adaptation Institute and an explorer. Welcome, Christian. Good afternoon, everyone. Sometimes technical things work. Hope you're fine, and I'll be telling you about cybersecurity and ethics and the connection to human beings. So I don't know that much about cybersecurity because I'm not an expert at this, but let me tell you what I've been doing for about 30-odd years. I've been exploring the world in all climates, in all conditions, in all situations that push us to resorting to extreme resources, but these conditions may happen at any time. We don't know what may happen in the next hour, in the next minute, in the next second. It could be a storm, it could be a polar bear, it could be suddenly an area that is devastated by a tsunami. And we also focus on climate tragedies, disasters, tsunamis, earthquakes, major migrations due to war or climate conditions. Now, for some years now, I have been working with my research institute on human skills to adjust to these new situations, these new lifestyle conditions, which happen very fast or sometimes much more slowly. We work in many different ways. Sometimes we resort to simulations. I spent 40 days in a cave without any digital technological tools, no watch, the opposite of what we do here, to see what the brain does when put in an anomic situation, very different to what we experience on a daily basis. So we also work on crisis situations, which means we can work on risk assessment and see how we address these risks before, while, and after they have happened. And it can be a number of risks. This is a beautiful field in sub-Saharan Africa, and 15 years later, it became a desert. Questions arise: how can human beings survive in such conditions and find solutions in order to face these new conditions? So these conditions have taken us to trying to defining risk and change. And in human history, there are three main reasons prompted human beings to change. When human beings were faced with challenges they could hardly handle, well, you have climate change, pollution, a number of things that we talk about right now. There are social or society changes. There used to be 15% of the world population living in cities in the year 1900. Now it's more than 50%. And so we have gone through society changes. And then there are technological changes that can totally upset societies. You know, the digital technologies are omnipresent right now. So, but for the first time in what we know about human history, for the first time, all these changes are taking place at the same time, which means that we are faced with a massive number of risks and changing conditions, which lead to some kind of disorientation for us. We're talking about security, we're talking about cybersecurity, about risk. So how do we secure systems in which human beings are submitted to incredible constraints, and sometimes the human brain hits a limit, and so we consider that the mental load is more and more present and creates more and more disorientation. We see the number of people in a situation of stress, PTSD. We have burnout, depression, because we have reached the limit in the amount of mental load we can survive to. And so how can we all survive? How can we all experience this in conditions where we are pushed to our limits? So we need to wonder about the human brain and its ability to face these situations. To understand what's coming next, I'll be talking about human beings a little more, and then we connect this to the cyber world. This avalanche happened yesterday in Chimborazo, and the people who were in the base camp were killed. You hear this new piece of news, and then you forget about it, but you remember that. Imagine on this camp there was your brother or your sister, and there's an avalanche taking the same happening in the same place, and this upsets your whole life. I'm not trying to scare you about avalanches, but I just want you to understand that a human being can only be impacted by a situation only if it affects its close surroundings, its company, a person's company, a person's family, a person's emotions. All human systems are based on emotional sensitivity. All the decisions we make, which are based on reflection, are actually motivated by our emotions. And you need to understand it makes a potential difference with IT systems, which are rather cold systems, and that usually go for something very simple. A human being, when faced with a new situation, will look for indicators. With their brain, they will try to find information and will try to select the right signal that will lead them to the solution. So they know a lot of things, they find a lot of things, and finally find a solution. And this is the way we program. There might be some self-learning systems, artificial intelligence, but the way we program a system, an IT system, we make them in the same way find a solution when faced with a question. The problem with genuine crisis is that these indicators are no longer there because it's a new situation. It was never entered, never parameter, never set up. So we need to move forward in the unknown. It's uncharted territory. And this is where you find the potential difference between the human possibility to project themselves into the future to solve problems. And we're not always very good at this. Imagine in the 1500 when Magellan went to see the King of Spain and said, I need ships to go beyond what we've already explored. And the King of Portugal said, Sir, it's useless because we know everything about everything. We've discovered everything and there's nothing left to discover. That was in the 1500s. He was told, we know already. And this is the issue, when we try to scope our risk system. We think we know things, but however, we're always faced with something we don't know. And Magellan went to see the King of Spain and was given ships, and he discovered the Pacific. So, he explored the Pacific, sorry. And so whenever you think about setting up new systems, when you talk about innovation, always go through the concept of imagination, the ability to consider that we don't know everything. As I was walking around the FIC, I met a lot of people who think they knew. And I think it's one of the perils in cybersecurity. You think you know when you should imagine what you don't know, which means you need to look at diversity. You need to be open, and this cognitive diversity requires a lot of energy, but it is essential in order to find new ways to operate. And at the end of the day, the way we'll innovate in the future, we will set up our future systems, goes through two simple equations. Digital innovation, the way we will be using our wonderful systems we are creating and using more or less in a correct way, have to open up to new territories to help mankind. Hacking, the way these systems are attacked, is very similar to this. Anyone who attacks a digital system needs to find a new way to do it, to open new territories while trying to put the human brains they're facing in an uncomfortable situation. So we want to go further while preventing others to move forward and trying to disorient them. So we try to go to try and make them unstable, unsure, so we can take control of these people's systems. So when we think about this, maybe we should think about the connection or the lack of connection between the digital world, because the cyber world, and us. And I think that, I'm pretty sure you agree with me, but sometimes we may forget when we are creating something, because when we create something and set up new things, we are focused on needs. We look at what is needed in order to solve a problem while forgetting the rest. It is important to remember that digital technologies, whatever they are, digital technologies should always remain at the service of the living, and not the other way around. Digital technologies, IT systems, protection, security, all this is to protect the living, to make sure we can continue living the way we live, while create machines, secure them, if in the end the living don't matter or doesn't matter. And so this out-of-time mission that worked on our cognitive needs demonstrated something pretty simple. That is not that simple to understand. Any acceleration has an impact on the environment and on people. There's no way you can move faster without having some kind of impact. And more, we want to go faster, we want to solve problems, we want to compute faster, and we put human and cognitive systems in a very incredible way. They are mobilized in a very incredible way. And you have, therefore, mental fatigue, you have a number of IT people are facing difficulties at some point, because how far can we accelerate? Because once we are already in overcharge, we submitted to an overload, mental overload. Well, you know, accelerating is about having better machines that provide better services and that therefore are better, and therefore we take away some of the load from humans. Maybe it's not true for people who are over 40 here, but it must be true for most people. Do you really think that with all the technology we have nowadays, we have more time as human beings than in the 60s? Let me tell you, we don't. All studies are demonstrating this. The more solutions we have to solve a problem, the faster things go and the more time we actually waste. So it means that we're going to need to think about the quantity of systems we want to put into place with a very simple reflection. Instead of putting chips everywhere, IT systems, control systems everywhere, how far can we go? In the 1960s, my car could not be hacked. It could be stolen. Now I have 100 chips in my car. I don't own a car, but those who own a car, they have more than 100 chips. And the question you should ask yourselves, and I'm being very honest about it, and I'm not questioning your jobs at all, but is it useful? How useful is this? Every time I think about adding a chip somewhere, is it useful? Because every time I have an impact on the environment and on human beings, and I create an extra vulnerability because no system, however good, is not hackable. Is not hackable, sorry. And so sometimes the best way to create cybersecurity is not to create a system. And maybe one of the tasks you can carry out in cybersecurity is to say, well, there are great advisors so that can wonder about the risk, the benefit risk ratio. Some people are thinking about adding chips to human brains. We're not there yet, but we're not that far either. It's been tested on animals, and the real question is this useful? Because there's a syllogism. The more we want to help human beings with IT systems, the less time they have and the more pressure they are submitted to. Yeah, the chip in the brain might help brains, but it won't go much further. So the question is whether it's useful, and how can we look at cybersecurity not under the angle of a system you've created, and sometimes, and not necessarily meaning that we need to go back to using candles, but can we look at cybersecurity from a different angle by not creating a system? That's the question. Because there are too many things that need protection, and we don't have enough human beings to do that, and not enough brains to do so. So it is a definite challenge to ask ourselves the question, how useful is security and IT? It's a real challenge because things go fast. You know this more than anyone else. You're here to protect systems, but you know that if they need to be protected, it means there are always people who will attack them. And the notions of freedom, of emotions, of diversity are more and more forgotten in our perception of the world and the systems that are supposed to protect it. You all know Shanghai, the most evolved, most sophisticated smart city in the world. It's great. They go fast. They have amazing control systems of the population. And then the COVID crisis happened. And these systems who were meant to help the population became an absolute control system, and they were controlling every step every inhabitants were taking for 2 years. They know everything and they control everything. So maybe we should try to find a real meaning, a new meaning to cybersecurity, not just to secure systems, which is what you're able to do with great talent. And I'm very impressed, just walking around the booths. I was amazed by the amount of genius and intelligence that was concentrated in just one place. But all this can only be done for a simple reason: to protect people's freedom, rights, people's liberties, people's diversity. And strangely enough, we have been observing that artificial intelligence may be as racist as some human beings. Protecting emotions. We need to protect emotions, because without emotions, there are no decisions, and without decisions, there's no imagination. And without imagination, in the future, there will be nothing to protect. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you so much, Christian. Thank you so much. Well, let's call our panelists now for this roundtable, so we can discuss the notion of CDR. Tu veux switcher ou il me reste 3 minutes. Thank you very much. So you're here on stage with me now. So thank you for welcoming Isedwa Oribabor, who is the Business and Human Rights Lead at Access Now.
À votre droite, Élise Dufour.
On your right, Alice Dufour, Associate Lawyer at Bignon Lebray, and then Richard Bury, Director of the Responsibility and Digital Program.
So I think that to echo on the societal responsibility of companies, and something that is undeniable and widely accepted, how does this concept of digital responsibility emerge? So we started directly with Frances Hagen, who was connected with us, but I would also like to have your take, that you share your vision of what digital responsibility is and how it should be shaped for companies, in a few words. Richard Bury, would you like to speak first? So hello, everybody. So in a nutshell, digital responsibility of companies. So for a company which I represent today, EDF, a French power company, we asked ourselves a lot of questions roughly 2 years ago when we initiated our responsible digital responsibility program. It's a very vast subject. You can fit many, many things in it. And as we have a purpose as a company that is oriented towards reducing the carbon footprint of society with the energy mix, innovative solution, it seemed logical to integrate the environmental aspect of the digital world. That's quite sensitive. But I remember first and foremost that there was a lot of debate on what we call the digital sobriety. So doing less digital to have less problems. But we all have today the conviction that digital can protect the living and consequently the planet, and we need the digital solutions to be successful in the environmental transition. And our friend, for example, intervened remotely from New York City and did not fly to Lille. So that is one example of how digital can help the planet. And maybe tomorrow you, anybody here will work more remotely and say, okay, our carbon footprint is related to our traveling, and a lot of companies represented here will do more telemonitoring of power plants, remote maintenance, etc. These are solutions that help our customers to better master their energy consumption and eventually reduce it. We managed, thanks to those digital solutions, we managed to reduce overall consumption by 5 to 10%. So we need digital to manage successfully the green transition. And of course, there will be impacts to that. We need to be aware of that. And we are communicating a lot on that in France, among other, with the REEN law. And we know that overall digital generates around 4% of the world's carbon emissions, and we need to speed things up because it goes up about 6% annually. So for EDF, we've done our homework. A user in EDF is around 260 kilos of CO2 per year, so that's roughly 36 hamburgers, to give you an idea. So 36, that's about 350 kilometers of cars, fuel cars. So we're not so bad, but we still have work to do. And when we speak about cloud and everything, but when you click something, we're talking about tens of thousands of millions, even billions of hardware units, data centers, terminals, and you need to connect this all together. And that's more than all the trucks fleet in the world. It's more than all the airplanes in the world. And very soon, if we don't make efforts, well, it will be more than all the motor vehicles in the world. So we need to work on the way we produce our material, the way we buy our material. We know that the carbon impact is greatly at the manufacturing level. A little smartphone like mine requires 500 times its own weight in components, materials, raw material. That's roughly flying around the world 5 times. We need rare soils that are going to be exhausted in a medium, even short-term basis. We know all the geopolitical tensions around semiconductors for automotive or anything else. We're talking about mountains of electronic waste. So it's a huge environmental issue around digital, and we're not going to reduce the digital. We're going to do more and more digital, but we need to do it in a way that's favorable to the environment and with the lowest possible carbon footprint without hindering the use and assets. And maybe another aspect that my colleagues will speak about more, but social inclusion, reducing the digital gap. So it's an extremely complex subject that's not easy to put in place, and we need structure for that, and that's what EDF did. So I hear CSR and CDR, so environmental responsibility and digital responsibility, and they go hand to hand. So thank you for having us for this very complex subject and very cross-functional subject as well. So companies' digital responsibility, what does it imply and what does it inspire? Of course, this echoes the notion of CSR, which is one of the pillars to be taken into account in companies' CSR policy. So it's related to the social responsibility of companies. And usually there are 4 main aspects to be addressed to deal with the company's digital responsibility, starting with data and how personal and non-personal data is managed and secured. GRDP, we speak a lot about it, but it's part of this digital responsibility that companies have. And the reason why is that our GDP is meant to guarantee this fundamental human right of security and minimize the risk related to data. And this is one of the points to be addressed if we want to have a good roadmap, is ask ourselves the question, how do we handle personal data of customers, users, employees? The second aspect is the question of artificial intelligence and use of software that use artificial intelligence. We mentioned it earlier. Environmental subjects are, of course, to be dealt with via SIA that are powerful and that will help us in this environmental transition to have better control of the resources we use and to better foresee the issues we will be faced with in the future. But these artificial intelligence are extremely powerful, but also extremely dangerous. So we need to identify the risks, dangers, biases that artificial intelligence could induce. The third aspect is the societal aspect. That means the human, the digital divide inside the human scope. We are human and we need to be able to work hand in hand with robots, artificial intelligence, and not leave anyone on the side of the road. And if you look at that at company level, that means accompany, train, and make sure, as we were saying earlier, and as it was said during the keynote, that there should not be like mental overload and additional anxiety that can come from this digital increase, where the people, humans, can be challenged by machines and compete with the digital and digital power and not feel lessened for that. So we need to accompany, guide, train, and reassure people. And the final aspect, of course, is environmental, and be able to manage all those environmental aspects in the exploitation, production and exploitation of data and other devices. When you produce, we consume. When we use, we consume. This notion of digital sobriety, I like it a lot, and that should be our guiding line in this overconsumption society of everything. Learn how to be more moderate at a digital level.
The protection of user rights, it's part of Access Now's mission, which you represent. Could you tell us about Access Now, and could you tell us also how you react to Frances Haugen's comments?
Yes, of course. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. I'm very excited to be with speakers with very different perspectives. And I would certainly like to take a moment to recognize the incredible work that Frances Haugen and other whistleblowers like Sophie Zhang have done to do exactly what she was talking about, of improving that information asymmetry and imbalance between what the private sector, what companies have, and the information that users have. But just first of all, on the point of corporate digital responsibility, I think the responses have made it quite clear that the way that we think about companies' responsibility when it comes to technology has to be very broad. So on the one hand, when we think of technology and tech companies, we think, of course, of Facebook, Google, the typical big tech companies. But we know increasingly that there are companies outside of the typical tech sector that are tech companies. Essentially, all companies are or can be tech companies when they collect vast amounts of data on individuals, when they use tools like artificial intelligence. For example, we've seen that in the US, use of facial recognition technology in clothing stores, or makeup brands using it. So all companies, to some extent, are tech companies, which means that corporate digital responsibility isn't something that should only matter for the Facebooks and the Googles of the world. And secondly, as we expand the kinds of things that companies can do, I think that we have that we have to look really beyond what salient human rights risks are. So, for example, again, for typical tech companies, we think of issues of privacy, of freedom of expression. But as was mentioned, there are other issues like the impact on the environment that are different when we talk about technology than in other sectors. So corporate digital responsibility is really a much broader and more comprehensive idea beyond just what platforms specifically are doing with regards to their companies, with regard to their users. And to go back to one of the points that Frances made, she really emphasized the extent that the tech sector has a global reach. And I think that's really important for us to keep in mind, so that what Europe does that has an effect on platforms will reverberate throughout the world. Right, so we're hearing, and one of the points you made about the investments in English only or in different languages, I think we can really see the pitfalls we fall into when there is such a small, myopic view of what companies' responsibilities are. So, for example, we know that in places like Ghana, where the government is trying its very best to put in laws that make life much more difficult for the LGBTQ community. And we see things like, hate speech, misinformation targeting this community on social media platforms. And people realize that they can get around the normal safeguards that that occur in English by using local languages. So these platforms really need to keep in mind that the amount of investments and resources they put should really reflect where their users are. The users are not just in the US or in Europe. They're all over the world, and specifically in places where these platforms are essentially the entire internet. So I'll stop there for now.
You've said it, European regulation will reverberate throughout the world, but the Digital Services Act entrusts platforms and private companies with regulating the content that's posted on the platforms. What do you think about that, of giving private actors the responsibility of regulating the content? Should we trust them with, how, and should we, and how can we trust them with properly guarding these fundamental rights?
I think you'll find very quickly that I'm a skeptic when it comes to trusting companies to only do the right things. So I think it's important that this isn't just, a free rein to companies to be the ones to only look after their sector, but that there is cooperation between state actors and private actors. So the fact that we have more frameworks, more laws and rules in place that put external pressure on the private sector, I think is really important. At the same time, of course, we need the sector itself, actually, as Francis said, to raise the floor by essentially competing with each other to see who can be the most rights respecting. So I think when we think of laws like the DSA and others, the focus shouldn't just be on what the companies themselves should do, but ensuring that there is collaboration between state actors and private actors, especially when we know that that's more possible here, again, than in other areas of the world with weak rule of law where these companies do still operate.
But that brings up the question of responsibility of state actors and responsibility of private actors. Where does this responsibility lie? How do you draw the line?
Well, going back to the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, the framework there calls on state actors to be the ones to protect human rights and private actors to be the ones to respect. So there is a framework for us to understand where that demarcation can fall. But again, at the same time, we know that is the ideal and that's not the reality in many places. We have areas of the world where state actors are the ones that are actually perpetrating human rights abuses. So in that case, we know that we can't rely on state actors to protect or even respect. And it becomes all the more important for the private sector to do what it can to extend the same amount of human rights protections it gives to its users, for example, in the US or in Europe, into those jurisdictions as well. So I think that, and then, of course, historically, we know that private sector actors have also been perpetrating some human rights abuses, and in those cases, it's deeply important for the state, where it can, to step up and to have strong regulation, laws in place that rein in the power of these companies to act with impunity.
Je me tourne vers vous, Richard Bury. Élise Dufour.
Turning to Élise Dufour, who explained the 4 dimensions of CDR. Now, my question is, that's all very well, but how can we implement all this? Well, to add something to what Isadora was saying, the concept of framework is something I really like because it's a very complex and broad subject, but particularly when it comes to the material aspect of things. You have data centers and anything users can do with data, whether they're part of a company or in their private surroundings. We will have to pursue numerous objectives that might be contradictory, environmental, economic, cultural, social. You can increase the life cycle of workstations, which is great when it comes to the carbon footprint. But on the other hand, it cannot be at the expense of user comfort and protection. So we need a framework. We need some kind of governance, and for EDF, we chose the Responsible Digital Institutes framework, which means this is not just words. There are some kind of labels, and we tend to be looked at a lot at EDF. We're a major company, and we have received this label. And because we have this framework, that means we can deal and address various subjects, and we can engage teams, and we can federate various stakeholders, whether it is about privacy by design or when it comes to environmental protection or the end of life of material, and also thinking about people with disabilities. So it's a really fascinating topic. So it means we can build some kind of a governance. Some members of the executive committee are part of this governance, and they do great sponsoring because these are pretty complex subjects. And behind this, we need an action plan. So because we have been received this label, means we can really work on a 3-year plan. And we have committed to move forward in various subjects like responsibility by design. We have worked a lot on privacy by design, but we want to integrate CDR in our investments, in the way we communicate, in the way we manage projects. So the fact that we have integrated all this is a challenge, and the ecosystem's not totally mature about this. And it's interesting to work with other companies, with other experts. There's another axis, the expansion of users' transformation. And our relationship with these devices should evolve. So in order to provide more digital devices that will be more responsible. And finally, when it comes to 5G, we need digital technologies. We need to be efficient. And when we look at responsible IoT, because this is a definite case for us, we need 5G to communicate in valleys or whatever, but we don't want to do it without any kind of rules. So we also count on innovation to develop CDR. We don't always think of EDF when mentioning IoT, but you do have a number of connected networks and objects. Yes, and sometimes it's just cars that go around to look at meters. That's why we had these Linky meters. Well, we need digital to move forward, to improve. We needed to create value for our customers and to be more efficient. And this is what everyone expects from companies like ours. But we can do this in a very reasonable way, optimized way, without setting ourselves limits. In your purchasing policy, you have introduced CDR? May I go as far as asking you if you could resort to the services of data centers like AWS or others who have great market shares in when it comes to these purchases and contracts, how do you see things when it comes to digital purchases? So responsible digital purchases, that's a pretty difficult subject. Why? Because we don't have the tools. It's quite easy for us to specify responsible digital expectations when it comes to materials. Our companies are externalized. We have 50% of our digital services being outsourced, and therefore we can divide our purchases in 3 categories: material, our equipment, services, and then software. When you buy equipment, you have very technical specifications that we are able to draw up. You know, there are weight expectations, for example, and then there are eco-labels. I don't know if you look at laptops or desktops, but you can purchase them with a label that ensure some kind of safety, security, energy efficiency. We are able to specify all this. Now, when it comes to software and services, it's an area which requires collective improvement. Why? Because we don't have any standards. We don't have any eco-design standards. When I buy a digital service, is it optimized? I don't know, because there are no you can't find similar services. It's always a different service. So it's a great adventure, and we need to work on standards for eco-design. There were very few last year. Now I think there are a bit too many. As one of my former bosses used to say, it's better to move forward in a mess rather than... Anyway, we're moving forward. It's a bit messy, but I'm hoping that we will be able to specify collective standards so we can purchase services and software that will be eco-designed. Because you can imagine that a digital service can be eco-designed. It's delivered at EDF, and the next update, because we are demanding when it comes to functional features, when it comes to the code or the functional architecture or technical architecture, the eco-design aspect may have been deleted. So we have our own data centers, and they have been certified for a long time when it comes to energy management. And so we've divided by 2 our energy consumption and the power needed per service over the last 4 years. And so we achieved great results. But we also use the cloud. Why? Because we need services offered by the cloud. It's not just economic reasons or not because they offer services. And we're interested in them. And so when we looked for to purchase cloud services, we worked with upscalers together over the long term in order to diminish our carbon footprint, in order to be more responsible. And then there are other subjects like digital accessibility where there are already standards. Okay, so we have a cartoon. So you have been looking at the environmental aspects of things. We've looked at legal aspects. Is that a company's part to integrate ethical and political considerations when they make their purchases? Should it not be more economic concerns? No, I don't think it's their role. It's not it's a bit straightforward. It's not up to them. But I think it's in their interest to integrate it into their purchase policy. When it's complicated for EDF, for a small and medium-sized company, In France, for example, it's even worse. It's even more complicated because it requires a lot of resources and to take a step back. So the European level, we might need standards, we might need labels, maybe some scoring. We get the feeling that it's a bit like a digital jungle that is very complicated to decipher and to understand because it's intangible, right? So it's a bit insidious. It's hard to understand, and it's quite transverse. It's like over 360 degrees. There are so many aspects that, in my opinion, it would be an illusion to believe that society will be able to integrate this by itself as part of their purchase processes. But I think all companies will strive towards this because it's virtuous, because it means taking part in ethics and having a particular position for the company when it comes to these issues, you know, CSR, CDR, and but in order to do this, and I believe there are no laws, there are labels, right? It's a bit complicated, it's a bit messy, so I think that thanks to some kind of European framework, a bit similar to what GDPR did for the rest of the world, it was kind of a beacon. And, you know, in order to manage data, ethically speaking, looking at human beings. And we were copied, you know, over 360 degrees. There are equivalent laws now. Even China has enforced something very similar to GDPR. And so why, you know, not dream about an ethical approach at the European level so that we could achieve digital responsibility for companies? We have a few more minutes left. Even if there are no regulatory constraints, some companies might be willing to do it, might want to communicate about it. It could be great publicity, great for their image. However, nothing has been harmonized. You know, anyone can claim they do something about it. So are there any indicators, any KPIs, what would be relevant in order to assess CDR? Well, I think there's a cyber score that was adopted in France, and that will be implemented for platforms to assess the level of security they offer with a certain number of criteria. Well, we could imagine the same thing with for companies. Maybe they could have, I don't know, a digital score with a certain of criteria to assess the attention they give to digital ethics when it comes to their internal uses and practices as well as external practices. And I think the four main ideas we mentioned earlier on, you know, GDPR would be a definite pillar for security, but also in the way they choose subcontractors. We could also push toward, in order to avoid cross-border flows, some kind of digital sovereignty without necessarily asserting it, which is what China and Russia do. But these could be part of criteria that would limit the carbon footprint due to global data flow. It could be also a software approach, you know, the way software is chosen and the attention given to people, to users, for whether you're talking about staff or customers. And we could also talk about environmental scoring, which is probably easier to do. We are slightly more advanced in order to assess the company's carbon footprint when it comes to their digital consumption. Lisha, you wanted to say something? Yes, let me add something. I have had the pleasure to work for the French tech corporate community. It's like the Ministry of Finance, big company, platform. And so in the short run, we will be able to develop indicators like carbon dioxide emission per user. So we're trying to create ratios that are comparable from one entity to another.
What do you think about this idea of setting criteria, standards to measure corporate digital responsibility? We've talk of greenwashing and see how this idea has been turned upside down, worked around. Isn't there a risk? Would there be a risk of seeing companies searching, finding workarounds if we were to set criteria to measure this corporate digital responsibility?
Yeah, so I think I see a few challenges there. And first of all, I think our conversation today has shown just how wide corporate digital responsibility is and how we define it. So thinking of criteria that can fully cover a company's behavior on the environment, on privacy, on how they do in their supply chain, I think it would be very hard to create something that is that comprehensive and narrow it down to certain salient risks. And then, of course, as you mentioned, there's always the risk of companies doing this as a check-the-box exercise that ends up losing, the fundamental goal, which is to produce meaningful respect for human rights. But at the same time, I think that there are, within the sector, there are certain things that we can already start looking at. So I think looking at environment is a good place to start. Like that's a lot of corporate social responsibility has looked very well at environment. So there's a lot that we can learn from there of the kinds of exercises that companies should go through internally to understand the risks that their business operations pose. And even more widely, there are other things in the tech sector, like, for example, there is transparency reporting. So my organization, Access Now, we compile a list of all the companies and that we know of that release transparency reports, which are reports that show how companies respond to government requests for user data and information. And then increasingly also how companies enforce their own policies. And what we've learned from that is that there doesn't necessarily need to be one way, one-size-fit-all method for all companies to use. But what really matters is companies doing the work internally to understand where they have human rights exposure, and then publicly disclosing and having transparency about what they're doing to address it. So I see that I think there's room for different kinds of criteria that can cover issues like that. I think we should allow for innovation, right? We should allow for companies to be creative in how they disclose this risk. Creative in the sense that they're not limited to only like one or two certain categories, but that they fully understand again what the risks in their business operations are, and at the same time, it gives us as civil society, as activists, the tools that we need to hold them accountable, when we can see more specific reporting like that.
We're reaching the end of our session. I'd like to ask you a final question. Elise, let me ask you this question. Do you think we have time to ask the market and stakeholders' willingness do we have time for this so that they can focus on CDR, or do you think we will require standards and regulations? Well, unfortunately, no, we don't have the time for this. I mean, most reports that are published are showing that we've entered a crisis. We're in a situation, and we should have reacted yesterday. And so, unfortunately, in order to prompt any one of us to be digitally responsible, we need a framework that has been clearly defined, a European framework if possible, or, you know, because a purely French framework will not have the same impact. So you need a more global impact, and you need some control, which is why I like the idea of having public reports. I think it's a great approach, but in order to do this, we need this everyone to have the same metrics. You know, this is the impact analysis I've done internally. This is what I'm doing and what action plan I am carrying out, and making it public. And I think it's the best way to make us all responsible and drivers in this digital and responsibility and transition.
Running out of time, maybe
5 seconds. I would just say very quickly that there is a lot that the private sector can do, especially when we talk about technology. This is a sector that has more resources than any sector we've ever seen. So the issues we've discussed here today, don't make me pessimistic. I think there's a lot of hope because we know that the expertise is there, the resources are there, and we just need the will from the private sector to be there to actually address the issues.
Thank you very much. Un dernier mot, Richard?
D'un mot, je dirais que je regarderai le
I'm going to look at the half-full glass. I'm very proud to see that our French institutions are so involved in this subject. I mean, we're an example compared to our neighbors with the Erin law, the dynamics with the denim, high school goers are trained about digital responsibility, and then you have the CDR in data centers, and when you cities need a digital responsibility plan by 2025, and I'm not sure our neighbors have this. So yeah, the half-full glass. It's nice. It's being filled, right? And this is what we've been hearing at FIC over these 3 days. I think there's a common desire and there are common ways to reach our objectives. How can we coexist, public sector, private sector, when it comes to environmental, digital issues? Thank you very much. Now, cartoon, which is a digital vision of a very famous drawing. Thank you, Gérard. And thank you, Frances Haugen. Thank you for taking part in this panel. Now, the final stretch of this plenary session, please welcome the European Commissioner, Martin Skinas, he's in charge of promoting the European way of life. So, Martin Skinas, please, you have the floor.
Mesdames et messieurs, c'est un immense plaisir de vous retrouver.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to have you here in Lille for the second consecutive year as part of the FIC, and it is in a very particular context that I am here today. Remember, during the last edition in September 2021, global security challenges had been dominated by the crisis in Afghanistan and the instrumentalization of migratory flows caused by the Belarus regime. A year later, the war that we Europeans thought would be part of the last century has come back with wreaking havoc at the doors of the European Union. An illegal war, unjustified war, is an offense to democracy and its values. and it will require a common answer by Europe. This strategic switch has accelerated the mutation of the European Union as a real defense stakeholder. This week, our union showed that it was ready to face the situation and to develop the right resources for defense by using an ambitious strategic and defense compass, developing very concrete leads in order to prevent problems. No, but what I'd like to talk to you today about is what the war in Ukraine shows about modern conflict. More and more hybrid shapes which do not only take place in traditional premises on the ground, in the sea, at sea or in the air, but also in more virtual spaces. Before the Russian soldiers crossed the Ukrainian border, the Kremlin had launched a huge cyber attack that disrupted the satellite communication network used by the Ukrainian army. And in the days and weeks that preceded the offensive, the critical Ukrainian structures had been targeted by cyber attacks. And to this were added information manipulation in order to legitimate an action that was not justifiable, which prompted Europe to help a proud people that defend their sovereignty. Ukraine is not an isolated case. As I was saying back in September, in the last few years, our member states were targeted by massive cyber attacks, targeting critical and strategic sectors from health to energy through telecommunications and public administration. And we cannot ignore the possibility of cyber attacks against Ukraine from the European Union. So this is what we need to get ready for. Borderless borders. Borderless war with assailants that hit without any distinction soldiers and civilians, companies, for minimal risk taken and costs. In order to face all this, we need to protect our critical infrastructure and our digital space against any kind and form of security threat.
De l'Union européenne a été jalonné de plusieurs succès en ce sens. Tout d'abord, avec l'adoption historique du Digital Services Act, dont ma collègue, la vice-présidente exécutive Margrethe Vestager, vous a parlé hier. Mais aussi avec un autre accord historique, un accord politique trouvé le mois dernier entre les co-législateurs européens sur notre proposition pour une révision de la directive sur la sécurité des réseaux et des systèmes d'information, connue comme la directive Nice 2. Nous travaillons maintenant avec la présidence française à ce que notre proposition jumelle pour une nouvelle directive sur les infrastructures critiques, la résilience des entités critiques, connaisse le même succès. Et nous ne comptons pas de nous arrêter là. Nous devons établir des normes communes européennes de cybersécurité pour les produits et les services, et notamment les objets connectés, qui sont mis sur le marché européen et que nos concitoyens et entreprises utilisent chaque jour. C'est cette ambition d'un Cyber Resilience Act que nous présenterons comme proposition formelle de la part de la Commission européenne d'ici à la fin de l'année. À la demande du Conseil et de nos États membres, dans ses conclusions sur le développement d'une posture cyber-européenne, La Commission travaille également à l'élaboration de fonds d'intervention d'urgence pour la cybersécurité que nous présenterons aussi dans les mois à venir. Nous sommes déterminés et préparés à mener à bien ces initiatives. L'ère de la naïveté européenne en matière de cybersécurité est terminée. Dans un contexte géostratégique de plus en plus complexe, qui voit des puissances lutter de manière agressive pour une domination hégémonique et contester les principes internationaux communément établis, voire s'en affranchir complètement, c'est vers l'Europe, puissance de stabilité, de raison, c'est vers l'Europe qu'on regarde. L'Europe comme une puissance qui tire sa force de valeur inconditionnelle, de liberté, de démocratie et de prospérité. Une puissance qui avance, qui innove, qui inspire. Notre Union a en effet ceci d'unique, que le seul espace politique dans lequel 27 États membres démocratiques disposent d'une approche et d'un cadre réglementaire commun pour la cybersécurité. Car nous avons compris que ce n'est qu'ensemble, de manière coordonnée, unitaire, solidaire, que nous pourrons faire face à des menaces qui ne connaissent pas de frontières. Une coopération d'ailleurs qui bénéficie de l'immense expertise apportée.
Benefits from a huge amount of expertise from our experts. To name a few of them, the ENISA, the European Agency for Cybersecurity, that has years of experience in identifying threats and also in cyber competencies. And another important agency, Europol, who today plays a key role, major role on the field in the context of the war in Ukraine. This union of security that we work endlessly inspires our partners, and namely our partners across the Atlantic. In the last months, the Biden administration took up an array of tools for cybersecurity and to protect critical American infrastructures that are reminiscent of the proposals that we have been presenting since December 2020. And just 2 days ago, I was visiting the United States, and the exchange I had with the American authorities, the Inland Security Secretary, State Secretary, and other government actors allowed me to make this same observation, is that they have the same common determination to improve their resilience and fight against cyber threats and hybrid threats all together. Ladies and gentlemen, the European project is a promise of peace, prosperity, and stability. To quote Emmanuel Macron in his memorable speech at the Université La Sorbonne, the promise of a Europe that protects and offers opportunities. European cyber security must also be that of opportunities and not only protection. European excellence in this field is already no longer to be proven. Just look around you at all these initiatives and solutions for cybersecurity, which is tangible proof of the great innovation capacity of our experts and European companies. And it is this excellence that we must keep alive by keeping investing in research and disruptive technology research, bridging super security and super defense, and strengthening cooperation between the private and public sectors. We cannot just keep working in silos and keep doing what we've always been doing for the last years. The Cyber Campus is an excellent example of this cohesive and holistic approach that offers proper grounds for the French cyber ecosystem to grow. And International Cybersecurity Center that I'm proud to see for the first time, and that is fully functional, will allow us to organize technological research more efficiently and strengthen our joint technological sovereignty. But this is meaningful only in the condition that we are able to attract, train, and give professional opportunities to our experts. And as the Vice President in charge of coordination of the work on European coordination for security and competencies, I can only stress the urgency to fill the gap, the deficit on cybersecurity, and increase the number of cybersecurity experts. That's why I call to you to join forces and take concrete commitments to train professionals on cybersecurity and fill this cybersecurity skills deficit. The European Commission is willing to support you with the competency pact that we initiated over a year ago. Also, allow me to share my pride, the pride I have to see the very first European team taking part in the very first International Cybersecurity Challenge organized by ENISA next year in Athens. These young European citizens are the future of European cybersecurity and undeniably the best ambassadors of cybersecurity for our youth. My dear friends, this edition of the FIC that is coming to a close today is a highlight of the French presidency, rich in digital security. If the context, geopolitical context, witnesses, translates an explosion of cyber threats in the cyberspace, the political choices we've made in Europe are as many signs of a union ready to take up those challenges and the challenges of the digital future and stand up to its role of major actor in the world's cybersecurity. Together we will face these threats. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And this last plenary session comes to a draw for this edition of the FIC, and I would like to thank all participants, our speakers and visitors without whom the FIC wouldn't exist. I would like also to thank the city of Lille for FIC North America that will take place 1st and 2nd November. And next year, Lille will welcome us again from 5 to 7 April for the 2023 edition. Thank you very much.